Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission au format SuperFriends. C'est dans cette émission que l'on va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. Et on sera de retour dans cet épisode avec Bryan Talbot, dont la série Grandville s'achève en France. Elle a été publiée au final assez rapidement, parce que c'était il y a un an à peine qu'on voyait déjà Bryan pour la sortie du 3e tome à l'époque, Bête Noire. Et donc là, on va parler surtout de Force Majeure, une interview qui sera conduite intégralement en anglais, bien entendu, mais on va essayer de faire des efforts pour vous en proposer une version retranscrite sur comicsblog.fr également. Et le générique se lance, vous l'entendez, on se retrouve tout de suite en compagnie de Bryan. So Bryan, it's been a year since we last speak. How are you?
Oui, pas mal.
Pas mal, ouais. And you still have been learning French.
Oui, on peut essayer en français si tu veux.
Oh, okay, carrément. Well, so I already, we spoke about Grandville, and at that time you were mentioning Noël and Force Majeure, but they were still not published in France. So we'll speak about those two books a little bit later. But there's still one broad question I didn't ask last time, and I wanted to speak about your influences while you were growing up, as far as comic books are concerned, but also art in general, because it seems that you put a lot of what you grew up with in these books.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I grew up with comics like Rupert the Bear. That was my every year. That was my Christmas present from my dad. Was this Rupert the Bear annual album, and I was also influenced by the weekly children's comics in Britain, which I don't think there are any anymore. No. Very few anyway, such as the Beano and the Dandy and the Beezer. And there were three. It was an ideal time to read them actually in the 50s, because in the 1950s, British children's comics had a bit of a revolution. Most of them, practically all of them, were published by DC Thomson & Co., this Scottish company. And these three young artists started working for DC Thomson. Davy Law, Ken Reid and Leo Baxendale. And between them, they sort of revolutionised they reinvented the British children's comic. Up till then, the comics were quite, sort of genteel and sedate, I suppose. And the children on behalf of the people were very well quite behaved, And then suddenly, these three guys, these three writer artists, were creating characters that were completely crazy, like Dennis the Menace. It's not the American one. It's funny, they were both invented in the same year, two Dennis the Menaces. Dennis the Menace was just a bully. he was a bully. And they were the Bash Street Kids. These working class kids who went to a school called Bash Street, to bash, to punch somebody. And they're all anarchists. I mean, they'd have running battles with the police in the streets. These British kids comics. And characters like Minnie the Minx and Beryl the Peril, who were young girls who were terrifying. They'd have catapults and all sorts of weapons, and they'd take on the boys, and fight the boys. But suddenly, like the police, teachers, park keepers, people in authority were suddenly the enemy, And
I guess the parents didn't like them.
I bet the parents didn't read them, did they? But no, they were incredible. And my favourite was Leo Baxendale, who I do actually talk about in the afterword of this. Yeah. And he used to do this, put this incredible detail into all his pictures, I could enjoyed spending ages looking at all the jokes in the background, and it was great when I finally sort of met him and we became friends,
And I wanted to know also, because one of the things that impressed me the most in the whole Grandville series is how literate it is, how referenced it is, because we can see everything from comic books, from the British culture, but also from European and French culture. But you're also mentioning art, literature, movies, and I can't figure how you did it. Were you just when you were drawing a scene and you were seeing like a blank space that you could fill in with a visual reference, or was it only by instinct?
When I'm writing the story, I'll think of a scene. For example, there's a scene in the street in Grandville, Noel. It's snowing, and he's walking down the street with his friend. I just thought of the Rue de Paris en temps de pluie by what's his name, the author, the artist. It's got out of my head at the moment. It does when I try and think about things. They sort of come to me after when I stop thinking about them. I'll think of a scene, and it might remind me of a picture, of a painting. So I'll sort of use that as a reference.
So is it just random use of what you know, what you want to put in?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes I'll write a scene around something in advance. Like, also in Noel, there's a scene, which is pastiching the Last Supper. And I had that in mind before I wrote the scene, so it'd zoom out gradually and eventually you'd see what's basically the Last Supper. I was quite pleased with that because all the animals are in the same positions as in the Da Vinci painting, but they're all, each one has a speech balloon, and they're all reflecting the body language, what they're saying in the body language.
And so you're always in each of those books doing postface with explaining all the references that are in the books.
Yeah.
Was it mandatory? Because you could have also just done the work and just letting the reader get it.
Well, I did.
Or just no.
That's what I did. I just did the work and let the reader get it. And then after they were all published in Britain,
okay,
I thought, it would be nice to point out some of these things. So I wrote all those annotations for my website.
Okay.
And then when Lauren went to publish it, he asked me if he could use these in the back of the book.
Okay, so because the French are not literate enough.
Well, I don't know, because the funny is the Spanish editor asked me exactly the same thing. So they're in the Spanish books as well. He said, "Can I use these annotations? Can I?" In the back? I said, "Yeah, sure."
So would you say that all these references were for you, or just like a personal pleasure?
For me, yeah. As I said, they're not in the English editions at all, the English language editions.
Okay. And so another question I had, what struck me in the third book, so Bête Noire, is that the villains are using abstract art as a purpose of putting away all the messages that can be drawn with art. And I wanted to know if you also are really standing against abstract art. Is it something that you despise?
Well, not actively. It's just I don't particularly care for it myself. That's because I think I explained somewhere it might be in my biography. I don't know. But when I left school and I went to art school, I was taught by 3 exhibiting abstract artists who wouldn't allow anything figurative to be drawn. They were really evangelical. They were fanatics on abstract art. And the thing is, in the 1970s, figurative art was outmoded. It was considered old-fashioned, and they wouldn't let you do anything. And they went, they were very aggressive.
Aggressive.
Yeah. They shouted at you if you were drawing something vaguely. I mean, this happened to a friend of mine, one of my friends on the course. He was doing a still life, and he was doing it. He'd been doing it all morning, painting this thing all morning. Beautiful, realistic still life of this thing in front of him. And one of the teachers came in and saw it and said, "What the fuck is this?" And picked up a tin of paint and threw it at the canvas, shouting at him, and it splattered all over the canvas. And once a week, we had what was called a crit, a criticism, and you had to put your artwork on the wall. And they'd come in after lunch when they'd been to the pub. You know, they'd had a few.
Where they drink,
yeah. And they'd just come in, and anything they didn't like, anything that wasn't abstract or anything, you know, they'd just make you feel this big. They'd come out with all this hideous criticism, and you wanted to vanish. Yeah, one of the students was actually physically sick in the corridor before one of these crits. He was so frightened. You know, and so the whole thing it amounted to an abstract art aversion therapy, you know, for me and several other people on the course. So, and you know, their art wasn't very good. So I mean, ever since then, I've sort of seen abstract art. Not hated it, but I've seen it as sort of like a sort of art that charlatans can do. People who can't draw, you know, they'll do abstract art, you know.
But it's also very interesting the way that you put it in Bête Noire, that if we like erase the images, we also erase the message,
the meaning. Yeah,
the meaning. Yeah.
But that's the thing about abstract art: you can't give a political message with abstract art. You can't be philosophical with abstract art. It's just colours and forms and the rationale. It means what it makes you feel when you look at it, which is a bit.
And I was also thinking that in consequence, the fact that you're also putting all some sort of visuals and references is also a way to express how different style of figurative arts can also have meanings.
They can put messages. They can give a strong message. Yeah.
And in terms of writing, because in Force Majeure we're seeing a story of the past of Archibald Lebrock. And we also think characters that were mentioned before in book 3 or book 4. And I was wondering, how long were you planning these events in advance when you were writing, for example, Bête Noire, or were you already thinking about?
Yeah, I wrote the first one. It was just a one-off story, I thought. And it was the first, I'd never done an anthropomorphic story before. I thought, well, it's a chance to do something different. And I enjoyed writing the detective story. And by the time I finished, I thought, well, I've had a lot of fun doing this, fun in the writing, fun with the characters. I'd like to do another one. And then while I was doing Bête Noire, I thought I'd like to do a few of these, like Tantan albums that stand, each one standing alone. And so I started to design the 3, 4, and 5.
At the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now I'm working on this.
The prequel.
The prequel.
We'll get to that.
Which, okay. So it that has characters in it from the Grandville stories, only when they were younger.
Yeah. I assume. What do you like about detective stories in terms of structure or what they can do? Because so you've been doing quite 5 different books, but in the end, it seems that Force Majeure is just like, okay, so we got that Sherlock Holmes characters like from the beginning, but with the last book, we're doing a full Sherlock Holmes-esque story, and even 2 times, because there's also the flashback stories.
Yeah, well, one's sort of Agatha Christie style story, isn't it? You eventually meet his mentor, Stamford Hawksmoor, in the 5th book, who is actually, pastiche on Sherlock Holmes. Watson often described Holmes as having an aquiline profile, which means sort of eagle-like. So that's why he's a golden eagle. And he wears a deer stalk, smokes a pipe and everything. Yeah.
And so what do you like about the detective stories?
I don't know. It seems to me it's quite a sort of pure form of storytelling. It's it has very definitely they're plot driven, and they require a lot of planning. They require a lot of forward planning and foreshadowing. And because a good detective story, it's the reader should be able to feel like they can solve it along with the detective. If they thought about it a bit more, that's supposed to be the sign of a good detective story. The reader thinks that they can perhaps solve it.
And is it hard to write for you?
No, I enjoy writing it. I enjoy it. It's like a bit like a puzzle, putting a puzzle together.
But starting from the whole, the final image and trying to get all the pieces back.
No, not necessarily certainly with the last one. But I have to know what's happening myself before I start writing it. But each book I do is always highly structured first.
I guess you can't can't write it out and just figure out what's going to happen, especially in the case of for example, the murder that the first LeBlanc case with the Hawksmoor. You can't just write it down like, okay, so there's a corpse and we figure out how it went to. You have to have all the pieces before even writing the script.
I have the structure has to be rock solid before I start writing the script, a word of the script. Yeah.
And is it harder because the detective story genre is quite there's some ways, very known ways of telling a stories. So how do you do if you want just to have your own pick at the story? I guess like your own originality. But even though because you're in a very known genre, you also have to go by some pathways. I'd say, like at the end of Force Majeure, when he explains everything he did. So we're waiting for this moment. So it's really
well, that's a standard thing, especially in Agatha Christie stories, where
So how do you know
Hercule Poirot explains everything at the end?
So managing the balance of your taking your own style with this genre and also going in the classics.
But that's the only book I do that with. I think. It's interesting trying to write an original story within the sort of framework of the different styles of detective story.
Okay. So you mentioned Hawksmoor just before, and I wanted to know because that book is quite old right now. It was out in 2017, or your postface is dated from 2017.
Right. I think it appeared in 2018, but...
So at that time, you already knew that you wanted to do a prequel, that you still did want to go into this universe?
No. I've written a 270-page book since then, which the Legend of Luther Arkwright, which has been published. I've drawn. I drew Mary's last book.
Mary, And you told us that you were switching from one Grandville's book to one of Mary's books.
So we sort of alternate. So when was it? I think it was during lockdown. I started thinking of this Stamford Hawksmoor story. It was while I was working on the Arkwright, while I was drawing the Arkwright book. And I thought it would be nice to go back and tell Hawksmoor's story, when he was a practicing detective.
A young,
and he's in his 40s, I think, in the story. And LeBlanc's not in it. It's all about him. But there are characters who are in this who come into the story.
And is it also a way to get out of the whole steampunk Art Deco visuals to also to get so for something more Victorian? You mentioned that in our podcast last year.
Right.
And we saw the cover and it really seems like you want to also try a new style.
Well, it is. It's in a very different style, so it looks different for a start. Instead of being computer coloured like this one, it's done in a line and watercolour wash, which is then sepia toned, so it looks like to hint at a Victorian photograph sort of feel. And it's before the steam technology revolution, so it's not steampunk. It's all very there's all lots of hansom cabs and London P Supers, and it's very very Victorian. And also, in the Grandville books, the only text is the spoken word. In the case book of Stamford Hawksmoor, it's all narrated by Hawksmoor. He's supposed to be narrating the whole story.
So you're really willing to go to maybe a more vintage feeling? Of classic comic books.
Possibly.
And how is it? Or are you, I don't know if you're going to, because the book isn't out yet, but you're still going to more like 170 pages or something like that?
It's 172 pages, yes.
It's still quite big.
Yeah. I've got about 20 pages to draw.
To draw. But I wanted to know if that was hard for to separate yourself from the visual aesthetics and go for something totally different, because you still have to be a little bit coherent, because we're still 40 years in the past. So
23 years in the past.
23 years in the past, so just before the revolution, for the independence from...
And the last scene in Hawksmoor is the Independence Day.
Okay.
And of course, there's parallels with Brexit, and there's a lot of sadness. It's tinged with sadness, I think. The new one, so it's quite different in tone to the Grandville books.
Yeah, but what I wanted to ask is, after you have to still make this universe coherent with Grandville.
Absolutely, yeah.
Was that so? Do you have like a recipe, or just thinking about what you have to be careful for to maintain this coherence?
No, because
different.
No, because I know the world of Grandville. I know what it's like. I know what it should be like. So it's quite easy to do a early story in that world.
And is it because we were speaking a little bit about the thematics of the book, and basically that Grandville was about the rise of fascism, and still it was out like I said, 7 years 7 years ago, but it still really feels like relevant, still and even more irrelevant today. So was it at that time because maybe I just don't remember that you were already seeing what's even happening now?
Well, yeah, it's been happening for the last 20 years, really. It's been slowly happening for the last 20 years. It's and the Hawksmoor book, it's not anti-fascist specifically, but it's quite anti-nationalistic, in theme.
Because you don't think that's you think that's a wrong way of thinking.
Yeah, I don't like nationalism. I don't like British nationalism. I don't like Scottish nationalism. I think we're all one people living on a small planet, and we should get along together.
Okay, and how? And I also wanted to know if there's when you're writing, is it something that you're also conscious about, that you want to put your own views on the world while doing also an entertaining story?
Well, yeah, I think so, yeah.
But how do you? How do you
well, in the Hawksmoor one, it's just through the comment. Well, how he acts, and and his comments. So there's one bit in the story where he sees some men beating up a woman because she's been collaborating with the French occupation, and he sees them off, tells them to grow up, and so it comes out in the story as well as the sort of explanations. There's one bit where he's in Trafalgar Square. Well, it's not called Trafalgar Square; it's called Waterloo Square in London. There's a statue of Nelson's column, and it's Napoleon's column. But he's saying that after the revolution, it's going to be replaced, the statue, by one of Drummond, Harold Drummond, who's the prime minister, who becomes the first prime minister. So it's a little bit of a discussion about cancel culture. Is it right to cancel culture?
Do you have an opinion about cancel culture?
Well, what it says in Hawksmoor was he said they're replacing the statue with one of Drummond, and he says, is it right to erase history? Is it right to cancel the past? He says something like that. And then he says, I don't know. Napoleon was a tyrant who had a royal family executed, and he was a foreign despot in here. Perhaps it's well we shouldn't keep honouring him.
Okay. Do you think that Le Brocq is a likable character? Because all the way through the Grandville's book, he's quite violent.
Yeah.
He drinks. Sometimes he loses his mind, and even his adversaries are using his flaws to try to get to him. And I was he kills a lot of people. I wanted to know if you think of him as a hero or not.
Yeah, I think he's a nice character. I mean, he's only bad. He's only bad to bad guys. He always fights for what's right.
Yeah, but sometimes he's still quite a little bit rough. I think on other people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think he's a good guy. He's got a good heart.
All right. How long do you plan on doing the Hawksmoor book? Is it just one off, or are you?
Well, they're getting a bit much for me now as I get older. These long books, that take a long time. So
but maybe it's. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but maybe it won't take as much time as it took before, because I know that you mentioned that the Grandville style was doing like 3 or 4 days for one page.
Yeah.
If you're going without digital coloring, also maybe.
Oh, this is taking as long.
Okay.
It's taking just as long. But yeah, I'm doing, after I finish it, I'm going to be doing Mary's next book, and then after that, what I'd like to do is like short stories.
Yeah, short stories
with Hawksmoor.
Okay.
And do a series, something like, the Stamford Hawksmoor mysteries. Short comic length stories.
But still,
I've already written the first one, actually.
Yeah, but still in a graphic novel form, or are you trying to buy single issues?
Yeah, single issue form.
All right.
Yeah. I think that might be a nice idea.
And it's another form of writing short stories. It's
so I've already written the first one, as I said, and I've got ideas for the next 2 or 3. So, and then perhaps after I've done 4 or 5 of them, we'd collect them together in a book.
Yeah, and you never thought about just also working with another artist and letting him do a story in the Grandville universe?
I don't know anybody who'd do it. I don't know. I mean, I think all the best artists in Britain, everything, they're all working on their own stuff, or they're all working with writing partners. And
but they would have also all your the freedom and
yeah.
But all right,
I don't know.
Maybe for another time.
Yeah, if I found somebody who'd do it, who'd like to do it, that would be good.
All right.
The thing is, these especially in Britain, they don't make a fortune. They don't make a great deal of money. So actually splitting it with an artist, it's
okay. Yeah,
I hardly make any money on it.
That's also a good argument. Okay, thank you very much, Bryan.
Okay,
pleasure.